We live in an era of breathtaking capability. We've mapped the human genome, decoded the language of atoms, and captured the shadow of a black hole more than 50 million light years away. Yet, despite these extraordinary accomplishments, we still struggle with something far more fundamental: understanding ourselves. We can send machines beyond the orbit of Neptune, but cannot always reach across a dinner table divided by ideology. This is not a contradiction in knowledge, it's a reflection of imbalance. Technological advancement has outpaced emotional maturity. Scientific literacy has soared, but our capacity to apply it toward cooperation, compassion, and shared progress has lagged behind. And this divergence is not merely unfortunate, it's unsustainable. Every so often in human history, something happens that challenges not just what we know, but how we think. A Copernican shift, a Darwinian insight, an Einsteinian curveball that forces us to revisit the equations we once trusted. We are standing at such a threshold now, not because a meteor is heading toward Earth, but because we ourselves are evolving, and the framework we've built can no longer hold what we're becoming. This moment isn't science fiction, it isn't prophecy, it's a logical consequence of a species that has become self-aware on a cosmic scale. And here's the paradox. Our brains are wired for survival in savannas, but we now navigate digital ecosystems and planetary systems. The mismatch is showing. In physics, there's a concept called a phase transition, the point where matter doesn't just change in degree, but in kind. Ice doesn't become colder water, it becomes water. Water doesn't become hotter ice, it becomes steam. The fundamental rules shift. And right now, we're not just adjusting, we're transitioning socially, cognitively, even civilizationally. But transitions, by nature, are turbulent. So the question becomes, are we prepared not with new gadgets or apps, but with new paradigms? Can we match our outer progress with inner alignment? Because if we can't, all this brilliance may collapse under the weight of its own imbalance. It's tempting to view the disruptions we're witnessing, from political polarization to environmental stresses, isolated crises. But science teaches us to look for patterns. What if what we're seeing isn't random disorder, but a system under strain? A civilization approaching a tipping point? You see, complex systems, from ecosystems to galaxies, don't evolve in straight lines. They oscillate, destabilize, and then shift into new orders. The same applies to societies. History isn't a calm river, it's a series of punctuated equilibria. Peace, disruption, adjustment, repeat. So when our institutions wobble, our economies falter, and our social trust deteriorates, perhaps it's not because everything is failing, perhaps it's because everything is recalibrating. From a scientific lens, recalibration isn't romantic, it's rigorous. It means questioning assumptions, challenging inherited models. It's the reason the Earth was dethroned from the center of the cosmos. The reason Newton was revised by Einstein. And why even Einstein's space-time fabric may one day be folded into a deeper quantum reality. So ask yourself, could our current worldview of separation, scarcity, and control breaching its expiration date? Could we be standing at the edge of not a breakdown, but a breakthrough? And what would that breakthrough look like? It might not look like rockets or robots. It may not be televised or launched on a stage. Instead, it might unfold in how we perceive reality itself. Science shows us that what we see is filtered. The human eye can only perceive a narrow band of electromagnetic radiation. The brain edits more than it includes. The map is never the territory and most of reality. We simply don't perceive. Not yet. What's fascinating is that every leap in human evolution has been linked to an expansion in perception. Galileo's telescope revealed our cosmic displacement. The microscope revealed a microbial universe. Quantum theory shattered the illusion of solidity. And neuroscience continues to show that even our thoughts change the architecture of our brains. So maybe the next frontier isn't space, maybe it's perception. Let's take a moment to talk about consciousness, not as a mystical concept, but as one of the last great scientific frontiers. We've charted the surface of Mars, we've mapped the ocean floor, we've even photographed the event horizon of a black hole. And yet ask someone, "Who are you?" And the room often falls silent. Because for all our external mastery, the internal operating system of the human mind remains largely uncharted territory. What is consciousness? Is it a product of biology, emerging from neural networks like heat from a flame? Or is it something more an intrinsic property of the universe, like space or time? These are no longer just philosophical musings. They are serious questions in neuroscience, physics, and artificial intelligence. And here's where it gets fascinating. Quantum entanglement shows us that two particles separated by vast distances can behave as if they are instantly connected, not metaphorically, literally. What does that imply about the boundaries we assume separate one mind from another? Meanwhile, neuroplasticity tells us that the brain once believed to be hardwired can reshape itself based on experience, belief, and intention. In short, your thoughts don't just interpret your reality, they participate in shaping it. And then there's epigenetics, which reveals that gene expression is influenced not only by DNA, but by environment, emotion, and behavior. You are not merely a product of your genes, you are a dynamic participant in your own biology. So what happens when we combine these fields? We begin to see consciousness not as a static state, but as a spectrum, a process, an emergent pattern of complexity that is shaped by feedback, context, and even attention. And this has profound implications, because if perception shapes reality and attention sculpts, the brain then consciousness is not just a mirror, it is a lever, a steering wheel. It means that how we think changes what we become, not in a magical way, in a measurable one. And this is why the next revolution in science may not come from discovering new particles or forces, but from understanding the full depth of our own awareness. We are not outside observers of the universe. We are participants inside it, made of the same atoms, governed by the same laws, and perhaps playing a far more active role than we realize. When we examine the current state of the world, it's easy to conclude that things are falling apart. Political division, economic volatility, ecological disruption. But in the study of complex systems, there's a different way to interpret this turbulence. Systems under pressure don't always signal failure. Sometimes they indicate an approaching phase shift or reorganization. In chemistry, this is when molecules begin to vibrate in unison before undergoing transformation. In biology, it's the moment a caterpillar begins to disintegrate into a formless goo just before it becomes a butterfly. And in societies, the same pattern applies. We are not just facing isolated crises. We are witnessing interconnected stress signals, social unrest, institutional distrust, mental health epidemics. These are not symptoms of collapse. They're indicators of friction between an old worldview that emphasizes separation and control and a new, emerging paradigm rooted in connection and coherence. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Studies in collective behavior, from the synchronized movements of bird flocks to the emergence of neural networks, show us that when enough individual agents begin to shift their behavior, the system itself reorganizes. This is known as self-organizing criticality. It means that transformation doesn't require the top-down imposition of change. It only needs a tipping point of awareness across the system. So what if human consciousness operates the same way? What if each moment of clarity, each act of curiosity, each refusal to dehumanize another person is not just a moral gesture, but a microscopic contribution to a macro-level shift in human society? We already have early data suggesting this might be the case. Experiments measuring global consciousness fields, fluctuations in geomagnetic resonance, and synchronized physiological states during large-scale meditation events point to subtle yet measurable coherence effects. The mechanisms remain under investigation, but the correlations are compelling. Think of consciousness as a field knot, unlike gravity or magnetism. Alone, a single mind may influence a small space, but aligned together through shared values, through integrity, through empathy, we begin to shift the field conditions for the entire species. And that is not mystical thinking. It is system science. It explains why authoritarian systems thrive on division, because coherence is disruptive to control. It explains why misinformation spreads faster than truth because confusion lowers cognitive immunity. And it explains why genuine social change often begins not with policy, but with perception. The lens we use determines the world we see. And as any physicist knows, the observer is not neutral. Observation affects the observed. So when enough people shift how they see, the world itself begins to look different and then behave differently. This is not optimism. It is physics applied to civilization. Let's begin with education. For much of modern history, our educational systems were engineered not to awaken minds, but to standardize them. They were built during the Industrial Revolution to produce predictability, workers who followed instructions, repeated processes, and rarely questioned authority. The system did what it was designed to do, but here's the issue. We're no longer preparing people for factories. We're raising minds built to operate in a quantum world, dynamic, adaptive, interconnected. And quantum minds cannot be compressed into linear systems without consequence. Imagine if instead of teaching students to memorize facts that are already indexed in every device they carry, we taught them how to ask better questions. Imagine if we prioritize cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, and interdisciplinary synthesis over rote repetition. Why does this matter? Because creativity, not compliance, drives discovery, and curiosity, not conformity, is the engine of science. No great leap in physics, medicine, or astronomy ever came from following instructions. It came from daring to wonder what others missed. Now, turn to medicine. The dominant model views the body as a machine. Fix the broken part, suppress the symptom, isolate the variable. And to be fair, this model has saved millions of lives, but it's incomplete. New science psychoneuroimmunology, for example, reveals that emotion, cognition, and immunity are in constant dialogue. What we believe, what we fear, what we hope, all leave fingerprints on our physiology. Stress elevates cortisol, suppresses immunity, accelerates disease. Optimism is measurable through brain scan, enhance recovery, modulate pain, and alter gene expression. These aren't anecdotes. They're replicable effects. So what if we approached health not just as a mechanical fix, but as a systems balance? What if hospitals integrated neuroscience with behavioral science, nutrition with psychology, and medicine with education? What if healing wasn't just a pill, but a paradigm? And then there's economics. We've inherited a model that defines wealth by accumulation, competition, and scarcity. But in the natural world, our greatest laboratory health is defined by balance, reciprocity, and flow. Ecosystems thrive not because one species dominates, but because energy circulates. Forests, coral reefs, neural networks, they all follow the same principle. Diversity plus coherence equals resilience. So ask yourself, what happens when an economy mirrors a healthy ecosystem? You get regeneration instead of depletion. Collaboration instead of zero-sum competition. Shared value instead of extractive gain. This isn't utopian thinking, it's thermodynamics applied to civilization. Because entropy is inevitable in closed systems, but open systems like Earth's biosphere, like the human brain, avoid decay through flow, through feedback, through adaptation, and perhaps through redefinition. What if value wasn't just measured in currency, but in contribution? What if productivity wasn't just about hours worked, but about problems solved, lives improved, futures made possible? These are not soft questions, they're structural questions. And they demand scientific rigor not just in numbers, but in how we define meaning itself. Let's zoom out far out. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, the universe began as a singularity-dense, hot, and exquisitely ordered in a moment of expansion we call the Big Bang. From that event came everything. Galaxies, stars, planets, oceans, and eventually, you. You are not a visitor in this universe. You are a product of it. Not metaphorically, but atomically. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon in your DNA, all forged in the heart of ancient stars that lived and died long before Earth even formed. In a real sense, you are the universe becoming aware of itself. And that fact carries both wonder and responsibility. Because awareness is not neutral, it's directional. Once consciousness enters the equation, the universe is no longer just a system of particles following rules, it becomes an experience, a story, a mirror, and stories demand choices. When we study the cosmos, we don't just gather data, we gather perspective. The pale blue dot photograph, taken by Voyager 1 at a distance of 6 billion kilometers, shows Earth as a mere speck less than a pixel suspended in a sunbeam. From that vantage point, national borders vanish. Ideologies fade. The divisions we cling to so tightly become absurd. But perspective, as valuable as it is not the end, it's the beginning. Because what matters most is not that we are small, but that we are capable of questioning, capable of imagining, capable of altering the trajectory of the planet through intention and action. And this is where science meets ethics. If we are conscious beings in an unconscious universe, then consciousness is rare and precious. But if the universe itself tends toward complexity, toward self-organization, toward life and awareness, then consciousness may be inevitable. Either way, we are stewards of something extraordinary. So what are we doing with it? Are we using our minds to illuminate truth or to justify ignorance? Are we using technology to expand possibility or to entrench inequality? Are we exploring the stars out of curiosity or escaping the consequences of our own choices? These are not just philosophical questions, they are scientific ones, because every action we take sends ripples through systems we don't fully understand. And when those systems, psychological, social, psychological, reach a point of non-linearity, change becomes exponential. So here's the paradox of the moment. We are the most powerful species on the planet, yet the least aware of the full impact of that power. We have decoded the genome, manipulated the atom, and modeled the birth of galaxies. But too often, we fail to model the effects of our own unconscious behavior. It's as if we've been given a spaceship, but never learned to read the dashboard. That must change, because the future is not a destination, it's a function of present awareness. And as any physicist will tell you, trajectories are altered by the slightest adjustment in initial conditions. In other words, small shifts now mean monumental outcomes later. So, where does this leave us? We are living through a moment that, while not marked by a comet or a cataclysm, carries the same weight of consequence. It's not a disaster we must fear, it's a divergence we must recognize. A shift in how we define progress, how we measure value, how we perceive ourselves in relation to the world around us. Science doesn't demand belief. It demands evidence, curiosity, and humility. And right now, the evidence is pointing to one truth. The old models of dominance, of division, of disconnection no longer serve the complexity we've become. The most radical idea today isn't a new invention, it's a new awareness, a recognition that you are a node in a planetary neural network. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices ripple outward into the collective, not metaphorically, literally. We've measured how heart rhythms synchronize in conversation. We've observed how group intention influences physical systems. We've documented how communities recover faster from disaster when trust, empathy, and shared purpose are high. The human organism is not isolated. It is participatory. We are not separate from the planet. We are a function of it. Our breath is borrowed from trees. Our energy recycled from stars. Our future interdependent, not just with each other, but with the biosphere, the atmosphere, the entire cosmic context in which we exist. And so the great game-changing event isn't something we wait for. It's something we become. Each time you choose clarity over chaos, inquiry over ideology, cooperation over competition, you're not just acting ethically, you're aligning with the deep structure of reality itself. Because coherence is not a spiritual luxury. It's a physical principle. In waves, it creates resonance. In systems, it creates stability. In societies, it creates peace. And that's the invitation, to become coherent with the universe that made us, not by escaping reality, but by seeing it more clearly, not by clinging to certainty, but by dancing with uncertainty. not by separating science and soul, but by realizing they've always been looking at the same mystery from different angles. You are not here to conquer the world. You are here to understand it. You are not a mistake of evolution. You are its most exquisite experiment. And the question is no longer, can we survive what's coming? But can we become who we were always capable of being? Because when enough minds awaken, when enough hearts align not through force, but through frequency, then what seemed impossible suddenly becomes inevitable. That is how the universe works. That is how species evolve. And that, perhaps, is how humanity finally becomes whole. So step forward not with fear, but with fascination. Not as a victim of history, but as a co-author of what comes next. Because the most powerful force in the universe is not gravity. It's awareness moving in harmony with truth. And now, it's your turn.